Right now, go ahead and make a fist as hard as you possibly can. Feel your fingers dig into your palm, your forearm tense up. Feel that? That's roughly the grip strength modern researchers use as a baseline for an average adult today. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. If you'd been born 40,000 years ago, that same grip of yours would have been considered noticeably weak, maybe even concerning by the standards of basically everyone around you, including the elderly, and possibly including some of the kids old enough to help carry firewood back to camp. This isn't some exaggerated internet claim about ancient superhumans with cartoonishly bulging muscles, the kind of thing that shows up in a poorly sourced meme. It's sitting directly in the bones themselves, and once you know where to look, the evidence is honestly kind of startling. So, which body parts got weaker? Why did it actually happen? And how does the average ancient body compare to yours? Piece by piece, joint by joint, one specific structure at a time. Picture a young hunter setting out from camp at first light, and picture specifically his legs. Not sprinting, not straining, just walking. The way he walks essentially every single day of his life. Bare feet or simple hide wrappings finding their footing automatically over rocks and roots without him needing to look down. Muscles working with an economy of motion that took years of childhood to develop without anyone formally teaching it. By the time the sun is directly overhead, he's already covered more ground than most modern adults cover in an entire week. And he isn't even breathing particularly hard, because his body has never known any other pace of life to compare it against. No memory of a childhood spent mostly sitting to contrast it with. Hunter-gatherer groups studied by anthropologists routinely travel somewhere between 9 and 15 kilometers a day, on foot, over rough terrain, carrying gear, sometimes carrying a child. And they do this not as exercise, not as a lifestyle choice, but simply as the unavoidable cost of finding food. There's no rest day built into that schedule. Tomorrow looks exactly the same, and so does the day after that, for an entire lifetime, weather permitting. That daily grind left a permanent signature, one that scientists can still read directly off a skeleton thousands of years later, the same way growth rings tell you a tree's age, or the same way a well-worn tool handle tells you exactly which grip a craftsman favored. In a landmark 2015 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, anthropologist Christopher Ruff and a team of researchers examined the leg and arm bones of 1,842 individuals, spanning an enormous stretch of European history, from the Upper Paleolithic, somewhere between 11 and 33,000 years ago, all the way through the 20th century. One of the largest skeletal samples ever assembled for a single study like this, drawn from museum collections and archaeological digs across an entire continent. What they found was a large, clear decline in something called bone robusticity, essentially how thick and structurally reinforced a bone is relative to body size. And the decline was sharpest in exactly the bones you'd expect, the femur and tibia, the main weight-bearing bones of the leg. The bones of people who walked for a living were measurably, structurally stronger than the bones of people who eventually didn't have to. Thicker cortical walls, wider joint surfaces, built the same way an engineer overbuilds a bridge expected to carry heavy daily traffic. Here's the detail that makes the whole picture click into place. Ruff's team found that this decline didn't line up with the invention of factories or engines or cars, the things you might assume finally let humans stop moving so much. It started thousands of years earlier, right at the dawn of farming, roughly 4,000 to 7,000 years ago, and the decline continued gradually through the Iron Age and the Roman period, before essentially leveling off completely. Once humans began settling into permanent villages, instead of following food across the landscape, legs simply stopped needing to do as much work, and bone, being a living tissue that responds directly to the load placed on it, quietly adjusted downward, generation after generation, the same way a muscle you stop using gradually shrinks, and the same way an unused road slowly gets reclaimed by weeds. Strikingly, Ruff's data showed almost no further change in relative leg strength across the last 2,000 years, meaning industrialization, cars, and modern sedentary office life added remarkably little to a decline that had already mostly finished playing out back when people were still walking behind oxen and plows, wearing simple sandals, and had never seen a wheel more sophisticated than a cart. Your legs, biologically speaking, are the legs of someone who mostly sits in chairs. Not because you're personally out of shape, but because your entire lineage has been sitting in one place, relatively speaking, for the last several thousand years, and the invention of the car barely moved the needle any further. Now, picture that same hunter's arm, cocked back, about to throw a spear at a moving target from a genuinely dangerous distance. The kind of throw where missing badly could mean going hungry for days, or getting seriously hurt if the animal turns and charges instead of fleeing. This is where the story stops being about wearing down bone through repetition and becomes something closer to a precision-engineered weapon, one your body has been quietly carrying around this entire time without you ever really testing what it's fully capable of. In 2013, biomechanics researcher Neil Roach, working with a team at Harvard, published a study in the journal Nature, examining exactly how humans manage to throw so much faster and more accurately than any other animal on the planet. A question that had puzzled evolutionary biologists since Darwin first noted how strange it was that bipedalism freed up the human arm for exactly this purpose. His team recorded the throwing motions of collegiate baseball players using a 3D motion capture camera system and found that the human shoulder works almost like a slingshot. During the wind-up of a throw, the arm rotates backward, stretching the tendons and ligaments crossing the shoulder joint and storing elastic energy. Energy that then releases all at once, whipping the arm forward at extraordinary speed, faster than any other motion the human body is capable of producing. Roach's research traced this specific ability back to 3 key anatomical shifts: a wider waist, a lower shoulder position on the torso, and a distinctive twist in the upper arm bone, all of which first appear together in the fossil record nearly 2 million years ago, in the species Homo erectus, long before Homo sapiens even existed as a species. For comparison, Roach's team pointed out that adult male chimpanzees, despite being significantly stronger than humans in raw muscle terms, and capable of overpowering a grown man in a wrestling match without much difficulty, can only throw an object at around 20 miles per hour. A 12-year-old with basic Little League training can throw roughly 3 times faster than a full-grown adult chimpanzee. A genuinely strange gap once you actually sit with it, given how comprehensively a chimp would win almost any other physical contest against that same 12-year-old. That gap isn't about muscle at all. It's about an entirely different piece of internal machinery your ancient ancestors were specifically built around, engineered by evolution millions of years before anyone threw a baseball for fun. And researchers believe this ability was directly responsible for making effective long-range hunting with spears possible in the first place. So while a modern person's raw arm strength might not be dramatically different from an ancient hunter's in a simple lifting contest, that specialized throwing mechanism was clearly under constant, serious use back then, in a way it almost never is now. Tested and retested every single hunting trip, refined through childhood practice throwing at smaller, less dangerous targets, long before anyone trusted a kid with a real hunt. A body that spear hunts regularly is a body that keeps that slingshot mechanism sharp, the tendons and ligaments primed and ready to store and release that burst of elastic energy on command. A body that mostly types on a keyboard is a body carrying the same ancient hardware, mostly switched off. The shoulder equivalent of a sports car that spent the last decade doing nothing but grocery runs. Hands tell an even more specific story, written directly into the small bumps and ridges where muscles used to anchor onto bone. Details so fine that researchers need a magnifying glass and years of training to read them correctly. sometimes cross-referencing dozens of comparable skeletons before feeling confident in a conclusion. Researchers studying what are called infesial changes, the marks left behind where tendons and ligaments repeatedly pulled against bone over a lifetime, have found that ancient hunter-gatherer populations consistently show far more pronounced markings on the hands and forearms than most people today, sometimes dramatically so, to the point where an experienced bioarchaeologist can often make a reasonable guess about someone's daily activities just from examining these markings alone, long before checking any other evidence, occasionally even distinguishing a habitual right-handed toolmaker from a left-handed one, purely by which arm shows the heavier wear. Constant tasks modern life has almost entirely eliminated. Napping stone tools for hours at a stretch, climbing trees or rock faces to forage or escape danger, gripping a spear shaft tightly enough to control it mid-throw, processing animal hides by hand for clothing and shelter, building and repairing simple structures, weaving cordage from plant fiber. All of it, day after day, left a permanent architectural signature in the hand bones themselves, a kind of biological fingerprint of a lifetime spent doing real physical work. Modern grip strength studies comparing industrialized populations to populations still relying heavily on manual subsistence work consistently find the same pattern. Hands doing less daily manual work develop measurably less grip strength, generation after generation, exactly the same way legs did once walking stopped being mandatory. Backs and cores followed a similar trajectory, shaped by a task modern life mostly outsources to wheels, trucks, and elevators. Carrying things, constantly, without machinery of any kind, and without the option of simply making 2 trips instead of 1, or waiting for someone stronger to come help. Even something as simple as fetching water, a task most modern people accomplish by turning a tap for 2 seconds, could mean a multi-kilometer round trip carrying a genuinely heavy container balanced against the body, repeated daily regardless of weather, health, or how tired yesterday's trip had left you. An ancient forager wasn't just walking 9 to 15 kilometers a day. She was frequently walking it while carrying firewood, water, foraged plants, or a child. Sometimes multiple of these at once, weight distributed and balanced without a backpack engineered by anyone, using core and back muscles that had to fire correctly with every single step, or risk a serious injury with no modern hospital anywhere nearby to fix it, no painkillers stronger than whatever bark or root her community had discovered worked, no MRI to check exactly what had gone wrong if her back did give out, and no option to simply call in sick and rest for a week while someone else covered her responsibilities. That sustained core demand, repeated daily for an entire lifetime, starting in childhood as soon as a child was old enough to help carry something small, and continuing until the body simply couldn't do it anymore, builds a fundamentally different baseline of trunk strength and stability than the version most modern bodies ever develop. Even the version that goes to the gym 3 times a week and considers themselves in genuinely good shape. Some of the clearest numbers on this actually come from research comparing grip strength across different populations still alive today. Researchers studying communities that maintain a heavily manual, subsistence-based lifestyle, doing extensive farming, fishing, or foraging by hand rather than by machine, have repeatedly found grip strength scores well above the average recorded in industrialized populations of similar age and body size, sometimes by a striking margin. Differences large enough to show up clearly even when researchers control carefully for body size, age, and general health. It isn't that these populations are doing anything special or following some optimized training regimen designed by a coach with a clipboard. They're simply using their hands, constantly, for real physical tasks, the same way essentially every human being on the planet did until shockingly recently in the full span of our species' history. A history that stretches back roughly 300,000 years, the vast majority of which involved no alternative to manual labor whatsoever, no machine to hand the job off to. Grip strength, it turns out, might be one of the most sensitive, honest indicators of a body's actual daily physical demands, more revealing in some ways than looking at muscle size alone. Because a hand that grips constantly develops connective tissue and bone architecture that a hand which mostly taps a keyboard simply has no reason to build, no matter how much time that same person spends lifting weights at a gym 3 evenings a week. It's worth pointing out that Homo sapiens weren't even the most physically robust hominins to walk the earth. Neanderthals, who overlapped with early modern humans for thousands of years across Ice Age Europe, had noticeably thicker, denser bones and more heavily muscled builds than either ancient or modern Homo sapiens. Likely an adaptation to the brutal cold and the close-range, physically demanding hunting style their environment seemed to require. Wrestling large, dangerous animals at close quarters with handheld thrusting spears, rather than throwing weapons from a safer distance, the way their Homo sapiens neighbors increasingly did. Their skeletons show reinforced joints throughout the body, particularly in the arms and shoulders, consistent with a lifetime of close contact physical struggle against animals that could easily kill a careless hunter. Compared to a Neanderthal, even a 40,000-year-old Homo sapiens hunter-gatherer running 9 kilometers a day would have looked comparatively slight, almost delicate by comparison, which puts an interesting spin on the whole picture. Strength and robusticity across human evolution wasn't a single steady march in one direction, gradually building towards some peak of ancient toughness before declining ever since. It was a set of different bodies, shaped by different specific demands, each one strong in the particular ways its particular life actually required, and comparatively unremarkable in whichever ways it didn't. This decline isn't just an interesting historical footnote either. Some researchers studying modern musculoskeletal health have pointed out that lower back pain, one of the single most common medical complaints in industrialized countries today, affecting a substantial share of adults at some point in their lives, may be connected at least in part to exactly this shift. Bodies that evolved expecting a lifetime of varied, load-bearing movement, instead spending decades folded into chairs, then occasionally asking those same undertrained muscles to lift a heavy box or a sleeping child without warning, with no gradual buildup the way an ancient child's body would have experienced from years of steadily increasing daily labor. A back that never developed the daily baseline strength an ancient forager's back had no choice but to build is a back much more easily thrown out by exactly the kind of ordinary, unexpected physical demand ancient bodies handled routinely without a second thought. A single awkward lift from the wrong angle, enough to sideline a modern adult for a week. Something an ancient forager's back was conditioned day after day to simply absorb. None of this means a specific modern elite athlete couldn't outlift, outthrow, or outrun a specific ancient person on their best day. Modern strength training, nutrition science, and specialization can push an individual body to genuine extremes no ancient hunter-gatherer ever reached in raw peak numbers. A world-class powerlifter today can move weight that no reasonable ancient diet and daily routine would have prepared anyone's joints to survive attempting. What's different is the baseline, the average, ordinary, everyday body, built or not built by a lifetime of unavoidable physical demand rather than a deliberate, optional training program someone chose to follow after work on top of an otherwise sedentary day. An ancient toddler grew into an adult whose bones, tendons, and muscles were shaped from birth by walking long distances, throwing weapons, gripping tools for hours, and carrying real weight daily, with genuinely no alternative available to opt out of any of it. A modern adult can choose to build some of that back through deliberate training, spending an hour at the gym after a day spent almost entirely seated. But they're starting from a body that, left entirely to its own devices, simply never had to become that in the first place, and would happily settle back into a much softer default the moment the gym membership lapsed. So the next time you struggle to open a stubborn jar, or feel your legs ache after a single long walk you weren't expecting to take, you're not failing some ancient standard through personal weakness or laziness. You're running remarkably similar hardware to a hunter-gatherer from 40,000 years ago. The same bones, the same shoulder mechanism, the same hand architecture, just installed into a life that almost never asks any of it to do the job it was actually built for. A slingshot shoulder that mostly just reaches for a coffee mug. A set of legs engineered for daily 9-kilometer treks that mostly just walk from a couch to a car. A grip built to control a spear mid-flight that mostly just holds a phone. And a back designed to carry firewood and children that mostly just holds up a desk chair posture for 8 hours a day. None of the equipment disappeared. It's simply sitting there, mostly idle, waiting for demands that modern life almost never makes of it anymore. If you like learning that your own body has been quietly downgrading itself for the last 10,000 years without ever once asking your permission, that's basically the whole channel. Digging past the surface assumption to find the actual mechanism underneath it. One bone, one joint, one overlooked detail at a time. New episodes go up regularly, so subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one.